At the end of this session, you will be able to enlist the key features of morphology of gymnosperms, identify representative organisms belonging to this group, illustrate the life cycle of gymnosperms and angiosperms, make a comparison table of gymnosperms and angiosperms. But before we proceed, gymnosperms are plants with naked seeds. That is, their seeds are not enclosed in fruits. Seeds are formed from ovule after fertilization. So we can conclude that ovules in gymnosperms are not enclosed in ovary. The size of the trees is medium to large sized and also shrubs. In fact, sequoia, a gymnosperm, is one of the tallest known trees. These are some of the common gymnosperms: cycas, pinus and ginkgo. Besides the normal tap roots, gymnosperms show two special types of roots. The mycorrhiza, which is found in pines. This is formed due to symbiotic association of pine roots with fungi. The mycorrhiza increases the surface area of roots many times. In return, fungi get nutrition from the pines. A similar association occurs in cycas in the form of coralloid roots. These are negatively geotropic roots, which means they grow away from gravity, that is upwards. These roots are symbiotic association of cycas with cyanobacteria. Now the cycas plant provides shelter to cyanobacteria. Can you tell me how do the cyanobacteria help the cycas plant? What do they give in return? Now these are the two groups of gymnosperms, the cycas and the pinus. They have two different types of stems. Can you tell from the images what is the difference between these two types of stems? The cycas stem is unbranched while the pinus stem is branched. Now the leaves are simple or compound. They are adapted to extreme temperatures, humidity and wind. The main plant body in gymnosperms, like we studied in pteridophyte, is a sporophyte, which means it is diploid and it reproduces through formation of spores. Spores are of two types, megaspores and microspore. So these plants are heterosporous. The spores are contained in spore bags or sporangium. Sporangium is present on special leaves known as sporophylls. Now these sporophylls arranged into cones or strobili. Male and female cones can be present on the same plant. This occurs in pinus. Male and female cones may be present on different plants, that is in cycas. So in cycas, the male plant bears male cones and the female plant bears female cones. The cycas trees are unisexual. The sporophyte in gymnosperms, we already studied, it bears two types of cones, the male cone and the female cone. The male cone, also known as microsporangiate, and the female cones are megasporangiate. So in the male cone are microsporophylls, which bear microsporangium. These microsporangium have spore mother cells that undergo meiosis to form microspores. These microspores germinate to form the male gametophyte, which is also known as pollen grain. The megasporangiate or the female cone will bear megasporophylls. These megasporophylls have megaspore or the ovule. The cells in the ovule will undergo meiosis to form megaspores, and these megaspores germinate to form the female gametophyte. Now this is the sporophyte 2N. This will bear megasporophylls which are special leaf, again diploid. These megasporophylls will have megasporangia, diploid. Now megasporangia is covered by layers of wall. These layers of walls are of two types. Integuments on the outer side which have a protective function, and the nucellus on the inner side which provides nutrition. Besides these, inside the nucellus are the megaspore mother cells. The megaspore mother cells undergo meiosis, and this results in the formation of 4 megaspores. So only one out of the many cells inside the ovule will act as megaspore mother cell, and this one cell will form 4 megaspores, but out of these 4 megaspores, 3 will degenerate and only one will form the active megaspore that will germinate to form the female gametophyte. The female gametophyte reproduces through formation of gametes. With this starts the gametophytic phase. The gametophytic phase here is highly reduced and is dependent upon the parent sporophyte. In pteridophyte, we studied about prothallus, which is photosynthetic and is independent. That is the gametophyte of pteridophyte. But here the gametophyte is further reduced. It is made of very few cells, and for the entire lifespan, the gametophyte remains attached to the sporophyte. Development takes place inside the microsporangia, and this male gametophyte is known as pollen grain. Pollen grains are dispersed by air currents, and these air currents help the pollen grain to reach the ovule on the megasporophyll. Once there, the pollen grain germinates, forms pollen tube, and it releases the male gamete into the archegonia. The female gametophyte is multicellular and it is also retained within the megasporangium. It bears 2 or more female sex organs which we call archegonia. It receives the male gamete from the pollen tube. The female gamete fertilizes with the male gamete, forms the zygote, and then the embryo is formed. With the embryo, the sporophyte generation starts. Now, angiosperms are plants with flower. These are also known as flowering plants. Here, pollen and ovules are enclosed in special structure known as flowers. Now, these are the differences between the two groups of angiosperms, the dicot and the monocots. For sexual reproduction, an angiosperm plant produces a flower. This is a modified shoot. You have studied about microsporophylls and megasporophylls in pteridophytes and gymnosperms. Here they are known as stamen and pistil. Stamen is the male sex organ in a flower. It comprises of a stalk known as filament and anther at the tip. The anther contains the pollen mother cells. The pollen mother cells divide with meiosis and form the microspores. These form the pollen grain. The microspores mature into pollen grain. The female reproductive organ is the pistil. It has 3 parts. From the top, the stigma, the style, and the base is the swollen part known as ovary. The ovary contains the ovule. In ovule, one cell specializes as the megaspore mother cell. This undergoes meiosis to form 4 megaspores. Of this, again 3 degenerate and remaining 1 develops into the embryo sac. Now, what is inside the embryo sac? The embryo sac contains the egg apparatus, which is made up of 3 cells. One is the egg cell and 2 synergids. Then there are 3 antipodals and 2 polar nuclei. One end of the embryo sac contains the egg apparatus, the other end contains the antipodal. In the center are the 2 polar nuclei. The 2 polar nuclei fuse to form the secondary nucleus. So, the egg cell is haploid, the synergids are haploid, the antipodals are also haploid. The 2 polar nuclei are haploid, but they fuse to form the secondary nucleus, which is diploid. The 2 male gametes in the pollen tube are released into the ovule. Now you recall that the egg apparatus has the egg cell or female gamete and the 2 synergids. One of the male gamete fuses with the egg cell to form the zygote, and this is known as syngamy. Now besides the egg apparatus, there is secondary nucleus in the embryo sac. So the second male gamete fuses with the secondary nucleus to form the primary endosperm nucleus or pen. Now here 3 nuclei are fusing. The 2 polar nuclei which fuse to form the secondary nucleus is already diploid, and the male gamete. So this is known as triple fusion. The ploidy level of primary endosperm nucleus is therefore 3n. One set of chromosome from male gamete, one from one polar nuclei and one from the second polar nuclei. So 3 sets of chromosome. The central cell with the primary endosperm nucleus is now known as primary endosperm cell. It is triploid and will form the endosperm later. This endosperm will provide nutrition to the developing embryo. Where does the embryo come from? From the zygote. What is the ploidy level of zygote? Take a look and find yourself. Now finally, the most important thing. Here you can see the fertilization event comprises of 2 episodes. The first one is syngamy, or the fusion of male gamete with the egg cell, and the other is triple fusion. So there are 2 fertilization events happening simultaneously. So in angiosperm, sexual reproduction has a unique characteristic of double fertilization. Now here is the diagram of the life cycle of angiosperm. You can see here that the plant form we see around us is the sporophyte of angiosperm. The gametophyte phase is restricted to the germinating pollen tube and the embryo sac. Now with this we come to the end of this session. Before you can start solving the question, a recap of the topics covered in this session. These are your questions for your practice. Try to solve them. In case of any doubts, you can view the video, drop a comment,